So, as you heard, today's Bible story begins with a dramatic announcement, 2 Kings 2:3. The company of prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha, S-H, and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master, Elijah, with a J, away from you?" He said, "Yes, I know. Keep silent." After years of ministry that had included great feats of faith and daring confrontations with King Ahab, Israel's greatest prophet Elijah was now about to come to the very end of his road. Elisha, who had been mentored by Elijah, was going to lose his beloved master. We've all been there. Those times when someone dear to us is about to be taken from us. Someone who anchored our life. What then? That's what today's Bible story is about. So let's see what happens in today's story and what we can learn from it. I love what we get to do together each Sunday. The wisdom of the ages, God's word for us, applied to our lives today. Let's see what God might want to say to us this morning, starting with a prayer. God, we come again to you with hearts that are hungry for words of life. Feed our souls. May we come away from our time together today better prepared to live and to die, and to do both really well. We know it's a big ask, but you encourage us to come to your throne boldly, so we do in the name of Jesus. Amen. On the outskirts of a country town, there was a large cemetery that had a huge pecan tree in it. One afternoon, a couple guys were wandering around under the pecan tree, picking up the nuts that had fallen, putting them in a bucket. Once they had filled the bucket with nuts, they sat down behind the pecan tree and began divvying them up. One for you, one for me. One for you, one for me. As they did so, they inadvertently dropped a couple nuts that rolled down the hillside to the fence at the edge of the cemetery. About then, a little boy was riding by the cemetery on his bicycle and heard voices. He looked but saw nothing, but from behind the pecan tree, he heard two voices saying, "One for you, one for me. One for you, one for me." Scared to death, he turned and hightailed it back toward town. The first person he saw back in town was Old Man Weiler. "Mr. Weiler, Mr. Weiler," he said, "back at the cemetery, Satan and St. Peter are dividing up the souls." Old Man Weiler said, "You're just imagining it. Nothing like that's happening. I swear, Mr. Weiler," he says, "I heard it with my own ears. Come and see." So to humor the boy, the old man hobbles behind him all the way down to the cemetery, and sure enough, he hears it. "One for you, one for me. One for you, one for me." "You weren't lying, boy," he says. "Let's creep a little closer and see if we can see Satan himself." So they crawled up to the wrought iron fence, peered through the bars into the cemetery. They still couldn't see who was behind the tree, but they did hear one of the voices say, "Well, that about does it. Let's just get those two nuts down by the fence and we'll be done." They say the old man outran the boy back to town. Death can be a scary subject. We'd rather not talk about it, especially in polite company. One of my earliest memories as a child, I was maybe 4 years old when one afternoon we went to Grandpa's house, my mom's dad, Grandpa Dampier. He'd been sick with cancer for many months now. Me, my sisters were there with Mom. Mom's sisters were there and their kids, my cousins. We were out playing, but at one point I came inside to Grandpa's kitchen, and Mom and her sisters were crying. I'd never seen my mom cry before. Before long, the neighbor lady, whom we'd never met, came over to herd us kids over to her house to play. But even at 4 years old, I sensed that something was wrong. I stood in that neighbor's driveway looking back toward Grandpa's house as a big black station wagon backed up to the house, and they carried somebody out. Scary stuff when you're 4 years old. Then, to make matters worse, several years later, my family began attending a church that was determined to scare the hell out of us literally every Sunday. And so when the altar call would happen each Sunday, the preacher would be up there saying, "You don't know, if you leave here today without Jesus in your heart, this might be the week when you die and you don't want to go to hell." And so I kept getting saved and resaved and baptized and rebaptized so many times that the last time the preacher said to me, "Now, Jeff, this is the last time I'm going to baptize you." I should have said to him, "Well, if you'd stop scaring me to death every Sunday, I wouldn't have to get baptized twice every year." I don't want the kids in our church to grow up like that. I don't want us as adults living like that. Today's Bible story invites us to reimagine death through the eyes of faith. You've already seen how the story begins with this proclamation. Today, the Lord will take your master Elijah away from you. It's a reminder to each one of us that, like Elijah, our time here on earth is temporary. Nothing in the reality that surrounds us here on earth lasts for everything. Lasts forever. All things flow. Even iconic companies come and go. When I was a kid growing up, Trans World Airlines was one of the best known companies in the whole world. Today, if you mention TWA, nobody knows what you're talking about. When I was growing up, one of the most famous churches in the world was Crystal Cathedral. Today, it no longer exists. When I was growing up, the fashion rage was bell bottoms and clogs. Those were the days. But they're dead and gone. When I was a kid, there was a huge oak tree in our front yard that reached to the sky, probably 25 feet around. Today, if you drive by the old house, you can't even tell there was ever a tree there. All things flow. Nothing here in the earthly realm lasts forever. And what's true of everything around us is true of us as well. The Bible puts it this way, James 4:14. What is your life? You're like a puff of smoke that's visible for a little while and then disappears. But here's the thing. In our Bible story today, everybody is tiptoeing around Elijah, afraid to tell him that his end is near, when it turns out the whole time, well, look and see for yourself. 2 Kings 2:9. When Elijah and Elisha had crossed the Jordan River, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I may do for you before I'm taken from you." You see, the whole time, Elijah knew that his time was near. And he doesn't appear to be the slightest bit panicked about it. He seems to be just taking it in stride, like it's the natural next step in a lifetime of faith. I don't know about you, but when my time comes, I want to go like that. Just the natural next step in a life of faith, nothing to get too worried about. About 5 years ago, I had a chance to to practice that in my own life. I had never been in the hospital before, but I ended up in the emergency room. One day, a sharp pain developed in my side all of a sudden, and I waited it out a few hours and then decided I better go get this checked out. I was in the hospital diagnosed with diverticulitis, an infection in the colon, so they gave me some medicine, it cleared up, and everything was okay again, or so I thought. But in the weeks that followed, I could just tell that something wasn't right in my body. I was experiencing transient numbness in my fingers and in my toes. It would come and go, and I would wake up in the middle of the night, wide awake, couldn't go back to sleep. That was unusual for me. And then during the day, I would have these periodic experiences of like gloom and doom that would suddenly come over me, last for 10 or 15 minutes, and then lift just as quickly. I ended up back in the emergency room several times. Each time they would give me an IV with a saline solution, I would feel much better again. So they kept diagnosing me as being dehydrated, even though I was drinking plenty of water. And then came one night in the middle of the night when I woke up again. And as I lay there in bed, I can't describe it, but I just knew I was dying. This was it. I didn't want to alarm David, and he'd been in the emergency room with me several times in recent weeks, so I just said, I'm going to go back into the emergency room. It'll be okay. I'm just going to get some more fluids. You sleep. So I'm driving back to the hospital in the middle of the night, down Interstate 70 to Methodist Hospital. And as I'm driving along, I'm absolutely convinced that something is devastatingly wrong, that this is going to be it. And what surprised me is I wasn't freaking out. It was okay. It wasn't my first choice, but it was okay. I thought to myself, I want to make sure that David and my family know how much I love them. I thought to myself, I want to make sure you know how much I love you. I pictured myself, I don't know why, but I pictured myself the next Sunday sitting in a chair up here. I don't know why a chair, maybe because it's more conversational. Sitting in a chair and telling you, my end is near, but God has something great for you. Keep walking forward in the faith life journey. God has great things for you. And the surprising thing to me was, it was okay if it was my time. Now, who knows how I will actually respond. But by the way, it turned out, I should, I guess, finish the story. It turned out that what was wrong is that I had a chronic sodium deficiency in my blood. And so when they would hook me up to an IV, a saline solution, within 5 minutes, I'd feel great again. Once they figured that out, it was easily correctable. But I'm glad I went through that. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes I found myself wondering, when my time comes, how will I react? Now, when my actual time comes, I may freak out, right? It may be like when I walk through a cobweb, you know? Get it off me! Maybe that's what it's going to be like when it comes my time. But I hope not. I hope, like Elijah, I'll be able to embrace it as the natural next step in a life of faith. I heard somebody say once, I can't even remember who now, I heard somebody say once that death is the last great step in our path of discipleship. In that death gives us the opportunity to engage in the ultimate act of surrender, willingly surrendering our spirit back to God. Like Jesus did on the cross. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. When my time comes, I hope I can go like Elijah did, like Jesus did. Because as people of faith, death is not the end of the road, but a transition, a homegoing. And yes, that transition can be a little scary, but also, as we see in our Bible story, it can also be glorious. I mean, picture it. Elijah and Elisha have crossed the Jordan, and they're walking along together, talking, making conversation, their last conversation together. And then suddenly, verse 11 says, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. Elisha kept watching and crying out, Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. When he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. Imagine what Elijah was experiencing in that moment. Scary, yes, but exhilarating. Have you ever been to Disneyland and had the opportunity to do the Mr. Toad's Wild Ride? Scary, but exhilarating. That's kind of what I picture Elijah's homegoing experience as being like this infinite roller coaster ride, loop-de-looped beyond what you could ever imagine. Elisha and Elijah see angels in chariots of fire. The 50 prophets on the other side of Jordan, they saw nothing out of the ordinary. But Elijah experienced it, and Elisha was allowed to see it. Angels in chariots of fire swooping down to whisk Elijah home to God. That's what Elijah's homegoing was like. I wonder what mine will be like. I wonder what yours will be like. Do you ever let yourself think about that? And probably every experience will be a little bit different, but over the years, as I've read different people's accounts of near-death experiences, I've noticed that there is a pattern that is common to most of them. People who describe near-death experiences almost inevitably tell that there comes a point when their body is experiencing a certain amount of stress when their soul, their spirit, separates from their body and floats above it all with tranquility, even as the body descends into extremis, so that people in the room are seeing a body in extremis, but the person who inhabited the body, her soul has already detached and is in a place of tranquility. I read this past week a near-death experience recounted by someone named Jasmine Sidivia, and this is how she had a severe case of pneumonia, was rushed to the hospital. They almost lost her. This is how she describes what she experienced. She says, there came a point where I could see my spirit standing in front of me. My spirit was so beautifully perfect, dressed in a white gown that was loose and free-flowing. From my spirit there emanated a bright, soft white halo. My spirit was standing 6 to 8 feet in front of my body. It was so strange. I could see my spirit could see my pathetic body. By now my body had no color, and I looked all withered, cold, and lifeless, but my spirit felt warm and so celestial. As my spirit slowly moved away, it told my body goodbye, because my spirit saw the light and wanted to go into it. The light was like a circular opening that was warm and bright. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Who knows what your and my homegoing experiences will be like? Probably each one of them a little bit different, but there's no reason to believe it will be any less glorious and exhilarating than what Jasmine or Elijah experienced. Allow yourself to think about that, to anticipate that, and let that drain away from you that fear of death. But there's one last thing in today's story that we can't afford to ignore. Because until our time comes, we're here on an important mission. We find ourselves today not in the position of Elijah in today's story, but in the position of Elisha. By which I mean we find ourselves today in the position not of someone whose time has come, but rather someone who is left behind to take up the mantle and carry forward. Elisha models for us in today's story what it looks like to do that well. As we've already seen, Elisha, after crossing the Jordan, is talking to Elijah is talking to Elisha and says to him, "Tell me what I may do for you before I'm taken from you." Elisha said, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." Now that took a lot of chutzpah, because remember, Elijah was widely regarded as Israel's greatest prophet ever. And now here is his understudy, Elisha, saying, not just, I want to have the same spirit with which you ministered. He's saying, I want to have your spirit times 2. And guess what? God granted his request. As Elijah is being carried up to heaven in this whirlwind, Elisha sees what is taking place. Elijah had said to him, if you can see when I'm carried away, it means your request is granted. And so as Elijah is being carried up in the whirlwind, Elisha sees all that's happening, and Elijah's mantle falls off his shoulders and flutters back to ground. And then we're told, verse 13, Elisha picked up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and carried forward the ministry of Elijah with so much power, he ends up working twice as many wonders and miracles as Elijah did. Who is Elijah in your life? By which I mean, who's that person in your life that you know or have known who lived so beautifully, so spirit-filled, with so much power that if you were bold enough, you would say, God, give me a double portion of their spirit. This past week, I was walking down the hallway in the office area of the church building, and as I walked by Pastor Jason's office, his door was closed, but I could hear him behind the door. He appeared to be praying. As you're probably aware, next Sunday we're going to formally ordain Jason. And he must have been praying, getting ready for that, because as I walked past the door, I heard him praying and saying, God, please give me a double portion of Jeff's spirit of humor. At least I think that's what I heard him pray. And be careful what you ask for. You just might get it. No thanks. No thanks. All kidding aside, in your own life, who's been Elijah to you? Someone who by their beauty of life, their spirit-filled life, the power of their life, have been like a mentor to you, showing you how to live. For me, that person would be my mom. Those of you who were at her funeral here at the church last year will remember that I said in her eulogy that for my mom, the indelible image that to me best captures the spirit with which she lived her life was Mom singing. When me and my sisters were little kids and Dad was working the graveyard shift, Mom would put us kids to bed, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, but Dad wouldn't be home until like 11 o'clock. And so she, instead of sitting down and relaxing, she was crazy about wanting our house to be wonderful for all of us. And so she would spend the next couple hours from 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock cleaning the house. Often she would be vacuuming the hallway outside our bedroom doors. The doors were closed, but she'd be vacuuming and singing songs of worship at the top of her lungs. Me and my sisters didn't get a lot of sleep. But I wouldn't trade that for anything, because those were the moments where she was teaching me how to live. My prayer is that when I encounter the drudgery of life, that no matter what I encounter in life, that I will have a double portion of her Spirit, that there will always be that song in my heart that cannot be suppressed. I want to sing like my mother did. I want my life to sing like her life sung to us. How about you? Who's the Elijah in your life that if you were bold enough, you would say, God, give me a double portion of their Spirit? Why not be bold enough to ask? After all, that's why God put that person in your life. Why not, if you've never asked before, say, God, give me a double portion of that person's Spirit? Because whoever you are and wherever you are, you have been put here on earth on an important mission. Like Elisha, you are meant to do great and wonderful things. Now, don't confuse great and wonderful with famous. Most of life's great spiritual feats happen so quietly that almost nobody but God notices. So never make the mistake of measuring the significance of your life by fame or fortune. God has put you here to do great and wonderful things that if you don't do them, nobody else will ever be able to do. So pick up the mantle, wrap it around you, and move forward as if you are a prophet on a mission, because you are. You never know the difference that your life might make for somebody else. True story. Steve was a middle-level manager in a large company. He had 6 employees whose work he oversaw. On the radio, one day, he hears a management guru, Tim Sanders, talking about, this was back in the 1990s, talking about the importance of love in management. Inspired by what he heard, Steve decided that he was going to go back to his office and over the next several weeks sit down individually with each of his 6 employees to tell each one of them something that they do with great excellence that he was grateful for, and to tell them how much he appreciated them. One of those employees was Lenny. When Steve sat down with Lenny, he said, Lenny, one of the things I most appreciate about you is that you always complete every project ahead of schedule. And I also really appreciate your sense of humor on email. It makes me laugh. My life is better because you're in it. He gave him a hug, walked out of his office. A couple days later, Lenny shows up with a present for Steve. Steve opens it up. It's an Xbox. Steve says, why, Lenny? I mean, he knew what Lenny made, and they couldn't afford to give him an Xbox. Lenny, why are you doing this? You don't need to give me this. That's when Lenny told him the story. Lenny said, my mom died last year, and I've felt really lonely and depressed. So I went out and I bought a pistol. Every night in recent months, I've gone through the same routine. After work, I go home, I eat a bowl of ramen, I play Nirvana really loud, and I take out the pistol and I think about it and I get the feel of it. I was getting really close. But then the other day you came into my office and you gave me a hug, and you told me that your life was better because I was in it. I went home that night, same routine, but this time when I got out the pistol, it scared me to death. And all I could think about is that your life was better because I was in it. So, for saving my life, you get this Xbox, boss. Thanks. You just never know. Some of life's greatest spiritual feats happen so quietly that almost nobody notices except God's simple acts of faith and kindness. Like Elijah before you, you have been put here to do great and wonderful things that only you can do. The mantle has fallen to the ground, so pick it up and wrap it around you. Embrace your significance and live like it. Let me close with this. In the Lion King movie, near the end of the movie, both the old one and the new one, near the end of the movie, there's a scene where Simba, now fully grown, is wandering around in the jungle in exile. His life, once destined for greatness, took an unexpected twist when his father died and he was sent into exile, and everything's the way it shouldn't be. But then as he's out in the jungle, he crosses paths with the mystic baboon, Rafiki. Rafiki starts following him around and asking him an annoying question over and over again. Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Finally, Simba, annoyed, says, I'm a nobody, okay? Everybody, somebody, even a nobody, Rafiki says. In the conversation that follows, there comes a point where Rafiki mentions Simba's father, Mufasa. You knew my father? Rafiki says, I know your father. He's still alive. Follow me. I'll show you to him. Simba doesn't know what to believe. Is it possible? Could it be? So he follows Rafiki through the jungle, through the brush. They break out into an opening where there is a pond. Simba looks down into the water and sees his reflection. Rafiki says, do you see him? Simba says, I don't see anything. Look closer, Rafiki says. He lives in you. The spirit of your father Mufasa is now alive in you. Remember who you are. I'm up here today to say to you, remember who you are. You are the Lion King, so to speak. What I mean by that is that you were born destined to live a life of great significance. You are a descendant of the great prophets, including Elijah and Elisha. Even more importantly, you are a descendant of Jesus the Christ. The Spirit of the risen Christ now lives in you in double measure. I know, because that's what Jesus himself said, John 14:12. The one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than I have done. Dare to believe it. Remember who you are. Your life and mine here on earth is short, but not insignificant. Let's take up the mantle. Let's live into our significance, and then one day, as our great and last final act of discipleship, we will willingly surrender our spirit back to God, knowing that we have made the most of the gift of life. Thanks be to God. Amen.